Planning Commission meeting at 7 p.m. If you'll join me for the opening prayer and pledge. Lord, we're meeting today to conduct matters of business. Guide our hearts and our minds in the spirit of fairness, right thought, and speech. Impart your supreme wisdom upon our activities so that our affairs may reach a successful conclusion. Thank you for being our source of guidance today. Amen.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we will move to the approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve.
Second.
First and a second. Any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll move to citizens' comments.
We have none tonight.
Thank you, sir. Approval of the minutes from the June 11th, 2019 regular meeting.
Motion to approve.
First, second.
Just to be clear, we don't have a copy of the minutes from then, do we?
Emailed to you.
Okay, cool.
Any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we will go to public hearing. First one is PC 2019-02, a resolution to adopt revisions to the subdivision regulations for the city of Fairview, Tennessee. So we will open our first public hearing. Is anyone here to speak on behalf of that public hearing? If not, we will close our first public hearing. Second one will be for PC 2019-04, a resolution to adopt revisions to the subdivision regulations for the city of Fairview, Tennessee. Anyone here to discuss that item? If not, we will close that. We will go into new business. Item 1, PC 2019-02, a resolution to adopt revisions to the subdivision regulations for the city of Fairview, Tennessee. And I'll pass that off to staff if you guys want to give us a.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Item or resolution 1902, 2019, -02, centers upon the fire hydrants.
Fire hydrant installation within our subdivisions. Currently, the regulation is 1,000 feet. This reduces that regulation or increases the regulation from 1,000 feet to 500 feet, and also prevents a fire hydrant to be considered part of a subdivision when the fire hydrant is located outside of the subdivision. So as a new subdivision is developed, all fire hydrants to be considered within 500 feet of each dwelling must be within the new development, not at a pre-existing fire hydrant outside of the development, which may cause issues such as traffic diversions or hazard as those fire hydrants are in use.
Sir, any questions or discussion?
Motion to approve.
First, Burks.
Second.
Second, Power. Any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, guys. Item 2, PC 2019-04, a resolution to adopt revisions to the subdivision regulations for the city of Fairview, Tennessee. Mr. Collins, 2019-04.
Yes, sir. Members of the commission, the matter you have before you relates to the installation of cluster mailboxes within certain developments. What we have before you tonight is a general specification regarding the construction of the cluster mailboxes and the requirement that the mailbox locations must have a minimum of 2 parking spaces, and that for every 20 units developed, an additional parking space must be included. You may recall that when we discussed this last time, there were a couple of considerations within this. Number one, the regulation that the city is considering tonight is a regulation to require developers to meet approved or adopted United States Postal Service regulations. So whatever the United States Postal Service regulation would be what the city would require be done, and that we would require some certification from the builder or developer that they had gotten those approvals from the United States Postal Service for that construction, first off. Second, the city of Fairview would not in any way take ownership of these mailbox locations. That is unspecified in the United States Postal Service guidelines. However, since it is a United States Postal Service guideline and not a City of Fairview requirement, our only requirement is that it meets the U.S. Postal Service, then we would require that some ownership outside of the City of Fairview be maintained for those items. Again, that is an imposition not by the city, but certainly should be considered as a part of our subdivision regulations. Lastly, as a part of this, I've handed out tonight a copy of the United States Postal Service planning guideline for builders and developers. The question, Mr. Power asked a question at our last discussion about this, about the adequacy of adding one parking space for 20 residences or 20 locations. I will not bore you with this. It's a pretty interesting read as mailboxes go, but page 6 specifically addresses this in the handout that you have. And again, this is not for adoption, but just for general discussion purposes. Page 6, at the bottom of that page, you'll notice that it says placement of mailbox within one block of residences. So as we consider the addition of parking spaces, the guidelines that must be met by builders or developers are that the cluster mailboxes must be within one block of the residences. So if we're requiring 2 parking spaces plus 1 for every 20, we think the required parking that the city is requiring would exceed what is necessary for what's outlined in United States Postal Service. So that's what you have before you tonight. It remains unchanged from the previous reading, but we did want to give you that answer as far as how the 1 additional parking space for 20 residences was decided upon.
Thank you, sir. Any additional questions?
So does that mean if the development is larger than the one block, that you would have multiple mailbox receptacles? Like
Yes,
multiple
yes, sir,
cluster
that's how I
mailboxes?
read it.
Great, yeah.
Obviously, if it's going to be within an apartment complex or some other multifamily like there, then obviously that's going to be owned by the developer and managed in that way. The question comes when you have single-family residence that's not an HOA or not some other management, how that's managed or owned. We don't have the answer for that, and I don't think the U.S. Postal Service has an answer for that. They do require, and to your point, yes, sir, it reads as if it must be within one physical walking block, and if anything is constructed further than a block away, a new cluster mailbox location must be constructed.
Is the city gonna come up, or, because when you talk to me, there's not defined what is a block. Would a city come up to something and say 1,000 feet's a block, 500 feet? I mean, is that something that we will have to do later?
I don't think the city will have to do it, sir. I think the United States Postal Service at some
Okay.
point will have to identify that, because within that, and it's silent within this document, but within that, you must consider ADA accessibility. So how they would define one block, I think, is going to have to be defined by the use of that, because as we know, sidewalk, ADA accessibility, all those other things is kind of an operation all its own. And I'm with you. I think the one block designation is not very clear.
Right.
However, that's the guideline they're going to have to clear up as they get into that process. What we will require is that they get some written document to us, the developer, from the Postal Service, that what they propose for the cluster mailboxes meets their guidelines, whatever that guideline is.
If I'm hearing you correctly, and if I remember correctly, there's no building sign-off, like codes sign-off through you all, it's through the Postal Service, correct? To make sure that this is built to standards?
There will be 2. There, within the resolution itself, it has general design standards, construction for the actual type of construction. Now, we will have to sign off on that. But, so that will be our requirement, what is within that paragraph as far as the sizing and spacing. Anything outside of that, we would just simply require a letter or documentation from the developer that they've got from the United States Postal Service that states it meets their requirement. So there would in fact be 2, USPS requirement and city as far as the design construction is outlined.
So if they're pouring a foundation, we will go out and inspect that foundation.
Yes, sir, we would make sure that what.
I mean, I know there's more than that, but that's just usually the first thing that happens is foundation.
Absolutely, yes, sir. We would make sure that as for our design, it meets this paragraph.
Okay.
And then outside of that, there have to be a separate letter from the Postal Service stating that it meets.
But it would still have to meet every other building inspection that a typical, well, maybe not a house, because there probably may not be.
Yes, sir.
But,
Yes, sir, because one would assume there'd be lighting some other
Right.
thing, we want to make sure we inspect all of that, either us or the state electrical permit process.
One other question, weren't you talking about adding a cover over these mailboxes, or was it just certain subdivisions, or weren't you talking about a covered?
There are instances where they would need to be covered.
Okay.
And within this regulation, however it states that, we would inspect that and make sure it's functional.
Okay.
Anything else? I do not think we have a motion yet.
Motion to approve.
Birch, Power, any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Item 3, site plan Innovative Lawns, property located on Highway 96 North, map 18, parcel 47.09, commercial general zoning district, property owned by R. Eric Grisham. Mr. Jenkins, if you could read staff comments for me, please, sir.
Sure. It is staff's recommendation that the project continue the review cycle with given comments and be ready for the Planning Commission approval during the August 2019 meeting, pending acceptable comment resolutions. It is staff's recommendation that no action be taken by the Planning Commission tonight.
Sir? So staff, off of that recommendation, do you want to have any discussion or just wait for you guys? Did you guys review it and send some stuff over or something? Is that?
I would defer to our engineer just for a standard review update, so you'll know where we are in the
Okay.
process.
So I'm on my second review of the process, and I've looked through and I've completed my second review right before this meeting.
Okay.
So the next step is to provide my comments back to the applicant and have them take a look at what comments I have remaining from the previous.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. Is the applicant here for that? And you understand what he's saying there?
I'm Trent Smith with Southern Consulting, the engineer on this project, and the owner is Eric. He's standing next to me. Not really. We met with staff 2 weeks ago and found that and agreed that a lot of the comments that were provided to us at that time were not applicable. At the end of the meeting, there was a few comments remain that we did then go and address. This is a little bit of a surprise for us that there's not a recommendation to take some action.
It sounds like maybe he just got back some documents, he's reviewed them, and he has some more comments for you guys. And so once we're trying to get it, once it comes here, it's gonna meet, or if there's a list of variances that are gonna adjust, if that's what I'm feeling. So you'll get those comments, you'll have a chance to adjust them, and then it looks like you'll be back in August.
Move to defer to August.
First? Second? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Item 4, site plan Waffle House, property located on Fairview Boulevard, map 42, parcel 168.07, MSMU zoning district, property owned by Bowie Commons LLC. Mr. Jenkins, if you could.
It is staff's recommendation that the project continue the review cycle with given comments and be ready for Planning Commission approval during the August 2019 meeting, pending acceptable comment resolutions. It is staff's recommendation that no action be taken by the Planning Commission tonight.
Same thing, you just reviewed and,
So on this one, the comments were provided, from the initial, or the second review last week. And until just before this meeting, we hadn't received revisions based on those comments.
okay.
So we really need to look at how those comments that were submitted back a week ago, how they've been addressed.
Okay. All right, you guys, the applicant, you understand there?
Yes, my name is Jeremy Moody. I represent SEC Civil Engineering Firm.
Yes, sir.
And I'm Ken Williams. I'm with Waffle House Real Estate Department.
Oh,
We received a second review cycle of comments, some minor little tweaks to the plan. We've actually already addressed those. I sent an email to Micah before I left the office today around 4 or 3, so all of those are addressed. I have a set of plans here with the comments addressed. I would like to submit those and actually move for an approval or decision tonight.
I don't know if staff any additional comment. It sounds like if you guys are submitting something new, they probably just want to have a chance to review it to ensure before we vote on something that we haven't seen or they haven't reviewed.
Well, I guess my only concern is the only remaining comments that were left were just a couple little minor site comments here and here about erosion hills and stuff like that. I don't see why it couldn't be approved pending staff comments. That way we wouldn't have to come back on in August, a month later.
No discussion from staff or just proceed as,
The discussion that I had, and Mr. Blackburn may be able to address, I think the primary issue, as we discussed just a few minutes ago before the meeting, was the usage or discharge of a storm drain inlet, if I remember correctly, on-site stormwater retention, and then two matters that were not of significance, but they are need to be addressed within the property itself. Mr. Blackburn can address the storm drain issue specifically, but as I understand it, it has to do with inclusion of an off-site storm drain as a part of the development. Again, Mr. Blackburn can explain that specifically.
Sorry, so one of the comments was that the notes on the plans were site stormwater requirements were met by overall subdivision detention ponds. My comment was that the drainage maps that were part of that overall development plan weren't included in the calculations. Micah did forward me an email today showing that from SEC saying that the drainage maps that were provided with that original study were no longer available. So what I ended up looking at is looking at the drainage as a whole, looking at the subdivision regs, and looking at the outfall. Part of the regs require looking at two inlets, two stormwater structures outside of the outfall. One of those inlets did not provide an invert. It said it cannot be obtained. So that's really where I can't physically move forward on that without having that information to check to make sure that the drainage on site will not over inundate the drainage system on Highway 100. And with that information, I think we'll be fine. It's just I haven't been able to see that yet.
okay,
Such a short
thank you,
time
sir.
frame.
So the concern is not for the stormwater detention, it's for the downstream conveyance system of handling our on-site water. Is that correct? See, no, that was not expressed to us. So we have provided the report and the detention calculations showing how the site met stormwater calculations with the larger plan of development, but we were not under the impression that the stormwater pipe was in question. We'd be happy to provide any calculations or provide anything else that you would like, but this was not expressed to us.
Chairman, if that's what we're talking about, and that's the last issue to be considered on this item, then it would be, and it would not require a variance if we're going to review that and ensure that that functions properly in that way. Then if that's the primary concern, that it would be the privilege of the board to approve contingent upon the city's engineer confirming that drainage in fact does function as is designed. So that's clearly a purview within the board that you could do, given that that's the only concern. If that was unable to be met, then we would simply bring that back to the planning commission, advise you that it had not been met. Outside of that, as long as it could be met with our engineer's approval and the project engineer stamp, then I would be comfortable offering that you can consider that as approval contingent upon that final engineering note.
I feel like if the engineer's comfortable, you guys are comfortable, I'm comfortable with it.
The discussion there would simply be if, let's assume that the engineer is able to work this out tomorrow, then the petitioner does have the concern that that's another 30 days. We would be behind that for something that you would approve 30 days later based on the information provided to you at that time anyway. So given that the information you would be given would be the same, then you can consider that as an approval if we get that information, or not approved and brought back to you as such at the next meeting if in fact it cannot be addressed positively.
All right, so does anyone have any questions? We don't have any motions yet, so we can treat
Derek's
it either
thinking
way.
about it.
It was hard to tell from the email where the property was. Is it right next to Hardee's? Is that the piece of property, or?
MAPCO.
Okay. Next to Mapco?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So the staff's had a chance to review all the exterior elevation, the monument sign, all that stuff, so it all requires, the only thing we're just holding up on is some drainage.
Yes, sir. And again, the only discussion about the drainage is, does it have a negative impact versus what it has today, given the on-site detention? And if the on-site detention functions as is, then apparently there would be no issue downstream.
Of course, we don't have those in front of us tonight in anticipation of not discussing it. I guess we have it on our email.
One concern I always have when we do a contingent, it always seems to come back and bite us in the backside, just historically.
Yes, sir. I'm typically not a fan of the contingencies, but given the fact that this is just a check of a drainage calculation, that would,
Well,
seems to be an imposition.
and considering the fact that one of our biggest issues is stormwater and drainage, those seem to be common themes that we have problems with.
Sure.
I would personally feel more comfortable if that was already done and a known product at this point. So I'm personally not real comfortable with approving it without knowing in advance. I don't like doing contingencies. Again,
Sure.
we've had issues with those just time after time after time, so that's my thought.
The larger common plan of development for the Bowie Common subdivision was designed in order to allow the stormwater release rate in the front portion of the site to release at the same rate or lower than what it was previously, even with this site being developed as a commercial development. The overall Common Bowie subdivision is actually designed to over-detain in order to accommodate the extended amount of water in the front of the site not being detained directly on site. We just don't have a drainage map directly. We have the calculations, and the design engineer can provide those calculations tomorrow with the signature and a stamp on it, showing that it was initially designed for this intent, for this site to be developed in a commercial instance at an 80% or greater impervious area and discharged directly to the stormwater system on Fairview Drive or Fairview Boulevard.
I'm kind of like Commissioner Burks down here. I don't like the contingencies. I feel a little more comfortable with them when it's our people that the contingency rests on as opposed to a developer. Those are the ones that tend to buy us, we're going to do this, and then when it comes back to us, it didn't get done, and then we're trying to figure out how to straighten it out. I feel a lot better when if our engineer, it's the monkey's kind of on us on this one, so I would feel a little bit more comfortable because it's either going to happen in a day or two, one way or the other. And if he says no, then these guys are dead. And I mean, until next month, if they don't get his approval, then they can't go forward anyway. And it's not based on something they do; it's based on something an engineer that we paid does.
Mr. Chairman, may I address the board?
Sure.
And I respect what your concerns for sure. I think what I've heard here tonight is that everything's okay with this development, but we just got to confirm that the stormwater the retention and the drainage is adequate. And if you all would approve this contingent on that, the city engineer and your staff will hold the reins and make sure that what this engineer who designed the whole shopping center provides, I mean, he'll check these calculations and they'll make sure that the drainage works. Now, if we have to push this to another 30 days, it's not going to change anything other than I've got to go get an extension on my contract and I've got to come back out and we've got to do all this again. But I think we can find out, this week. He says tomorrow, but I think the engineer has the opportunity to review and check the work and confirm that what he's saying is true. And if it's not, then it's not approved. And I just would appreciate it if you guys would approve it contingent on that. So-
Well, I'm a person that deals with contingencies every day in my business, and I understand how they work, and they don't scare me at all, because I understand how to close those loopholes. It's very easy. You just make sure the contingencies are met. We're only talking about one contingency, and I trust this guy is going to make sure it's met, and we're only talking about one. And I'm also believe in moving things along and not making things difficult. So that's my opinion. I'm comfortable in putting my trust in him that he's not going to let anything get messed up. We're not talking about a subdivision that is on a hill with a slope or any weird kind of drainage issue there. We're dealing with a guy that developed the whole subdivision, the whole development over there. So I'm in favor of letting this pass and approve it contingent upon this one thing. It just makes sense to me.
Thank you.
That's my 2 cents.
So if anyone wants to make a motion for approval, a motion for deferment, motion for denial, if anyone wants to make a motion, we can go into the open discussion and discuss the site.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to go ahead and make a motion to approve the site plan for Waffle House, property located on Fairview Boulevard, under the condition that our city engineer approves the it's not a variance, correct? Not a variance? Approves the drainage issues that have been brought up tonight. Fair enough?
My second.
We have a first and a second. Any questions for the applicant or discussion?
I'd like to, I'm going to vote for approval, but I understand the concerns on the drainage, and I do agree with my people up here that that is a main issue that the city has, and we need to stay on top of it. But I also agree that it's not 100 homes, and it is in front of the existing development. It's one parcel that's probably was calculated to the nth degree when they did the whole subdivision, and it's the last piece in that corner. So my discussion is, or I would say that I would be for it.
Any questions or additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Right. All in favor? Yep. And all opposed. So that might be easier for you.
Get the names.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. All right, we will move into old business. Sweetbriar Springs subdivision, discussion on current road and curb profile. Owner Marlon Cunningham. Mr. Cunningham's present. We have any updates, staff, or anything we need to, any updates on that?
I can
Mr.
provide an
Blackburn.
update.
Yes, sir.
So the information that was provided is what we requested from the last meeting. I was able to take the original plans, lay them out side by side, look at the originals, look at the new. I discovered that there were some construction modifications to some of the utilities that were coordinated with Dixon Water Authority. Those were all approved. All of the information that we've asked for has been provided. So I think I've seen everything that I needed to take a look at.
So do you give a positive recommendation for the variance?
Yeah.
For the adjustment?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any additional discussion or questions?
Bit. I'm glad to see that it's going to work. But I go back to the argument we had last time with this applicant and the applicant that was with him also asking for a variance of, hey, I was supposed to do it this way and I didn't. You know, no real good explanation as to why. This is what you asked us to approve. It's what we approved. I'm not sure why people can't follow through and do what's approved. You've got a set of plans. I mean, I would assume you look at those. If not, then I have lots of other concerns. Why is this happening? Why are you making mistakes? And I'm not saying just you, Mr. Cunningham, I'm saying in general. Why are people making mistakes, then coming back and saying, hey, we don't want to fix them, we just want you to approve it? Why will people not just do it correctly? It seems like we should have a standard at some point of, we're taking the time to look at these plans, our staff takes the time to look at these plans, this is what we're approving, do it correctly. Don't come to us and say, well, I messed up. You should be checking these things all along. I mean, I'd be concerned that people are not. If there's a mistake here, what else is wrong? What are we going to find when we crawl into these storm drains? I mean, from what I saw, curbs are cracking, and there's lots of other issues. I just have a problem with that. What do y'all think?
I would like to say that I amen what you're saying. I really, as a builder and developer myself, you got to do what your plans are approved for, and you should do it in accordance. And I also feel like that if you're a developer and you're hiring subcontractors to do work, it's your responsibility before you pay them to look and make sure that everything that you've asked them to provide have been put in accordance to the plans and specs. And if they're not, you shouldn't pay them. And hopefully you had a bond on them, and that's why the plans, as my colleague said, we took the time to approve them, and now you come in with just a serious modification. It's going to cost the city extra money to redo the streets and stuff over time because of the storm drains. And I just think it's a bad idea to set precedents to accept it.
I agree with my two constituents. When you draw plans, you need to follow plans. There's a reason why you submitted those plans to us, city staff, for approval, and they were approved based upon what you recommended to do. And I'm like my two constituents. I believe you need to be held accountable to those plans.
Any additional discussion or questions? Anyone like to make a motion?
One quick just comment. It sounds like we're not really discussing whether or not it'll work. We agree, city engineer says it'll work, right? Like, that's not the question. It's a matter of personal integrity and responsibility. Are you going to do what you said you were going to do? For that reason, I can't have a clear conscience and say, yes, let's go ahead and approve this. Does that make sense? Is that fair? If I allow something like this, then it sets up a bad precedent for the future. And for that reason, I'm not going to be able to approve this.
Cunningham, you have any comments?
I think it was 2 months ago when I come up here and asked to talk about this. From what I understood that day, and I come back the second month, I was with the understanding that I thought the board was okay with it if the engineer would approve that it would work, that everything was fine. I don't know where I might have misunderstood something, but that's what I've been getting paperwork and jumping through loopholes, trying to get everything I needed to get in place for this, because I thought that's what we were doing. Going off what the engineer said, if the engineer said the calculations would work and the runoff it would be fine, I kind of confused tonight, to be honest with you.
Any additional discussion?
Well, I think that's what I understood as well, but we wanted concrete proof or something, right? We wanted for sure calculations that it was gonna work, is that what?
It was
Where we left it?
recommended the first time I was up here, it was recommended, and then it was deferred because it needed to go back to the engineer to see if the calculations would work. I come back the next week, I didn't have all my paperwork together because my engineer was out of town, he couldn't get it together in time. But we got it together this time and come back with all the information I was asked to get. So, I mean, I'm a little confused, to be honest with you.
If I may, the general discussions were, as I recall, that at the site itself, there were some construction matters that had taken place that were outside the scope of what had been previously approved. The petitioner, Mr. Cunningham, had asked for some of those changes to be made or to be approved. And the discussions were to have your engineer draw up the changes that you are requesting to be made, show that everything works as that design would be, separate from the previous design, present that to the planning commission, then the planning commission can make a decision whether or not to approve or deny those variances, is how the discussion was taken about. I believe at the first meeting, it was all discussion. At the second meeting, it was discussion and have the engineers draw these documents and present them so that staff could review and make sure what you're presenting actually could or would work. That was done, that was presented. Now it's back to the planning commission to consider the 3 variances, regardless of the process where they were. So really where you are tonight is where you would have been 2 years ago had the same variances been presented to you prior to any previous approval or construction. So what you have before you is a request for variances after construction rather than prior to construction. Outside of that, the process is the same. The assertions that it would have been voted on or approved by the planning commission, that's not an allowable assertion because there's no way that can be approved without a vote of the planning commission. So the request was by staff was to have it redesigned in such a manner as you propose it work going forward to meet the current construction rather than what was approved, and then the planning commission has the ultimate say on whether or not to accept or approve those variances. And that's what you have before you tonight. Outside of that, the city's not requested any work be done, anything be done on the site, not been on the site and approved any work. It's simply been present what you want to have changed on paper and allow the planning commission to consider those construction design changes.
I completely understand the principle, and I see that. I'm trying to understand, I guess, is what Mr. Blackburn, an inferior product? Is it going to cost Fairview long-term on the product of once we take over that road?
Having the curbs going in and out, that will make repaving a little more difficult. Milling and overlay will cost a little bit more, I would think.
We once had a discussion that they were going to fix that.
That has been fixed. All the curves have cut straight in with the catch basins. The catch basins have been changed out of what was recommended by Mr. Collins of the 18-inch grates. And the only reason why that was changed is because a prior engineer had already told me that this would work, that the calculations would work. My engineer was saying the calculations would work. With what Mr. Collins said something to me about doing was changing, he wanted the grates changed to line back up with the curb line and take that curve out, what we was talking about, out of it and straighten it up. And I did that. And right before the holiday, whatever it was, 2 months ago, or a month and a half, whatever it was, I had talked to Mr. Collins about it, and I said, I'm going to be here over the weekend working on this. I'm not wasting my time changing these catch basins out, am I? Because you wanted to put 18-inch catch basins as opposed to 24. I really done a lot of work over there to change and correct what he had asked me to do, what we had talked about.
Clarify, what was discussed was the issue was the catch basins extended into the asphalt and the curbs were constructed in such a way to meet the catch basin in an S shape along the curb. The discussion was to go from a 24-inch to an 18-inch so that the catch basins would be within the curb, and that the engineer would have to assert that the 18-inch catch basin would suffice in place of the 24-inch, was the original discussion. There was no approval of I'm not an engineer, I can't approve the storm drain. I can just simply state that that's the only way it's going to meet the existing curb, and that the engineer is going to have to draft some sort of approval whether or not that meets the storm drain as previously approved by the design for the storm drain. Outside of that, that's where we are.
Was that not the construction drawings? Did they not show the smaller drains?
So the review, my review is for the stormwater and the modifications and how those all relate. And the design, based on what was provided, will be sufficient for what's out there. There were some modifications, adding a swale between some properties to kind of mitigate that and slow the water down a little bit so that it doesn't all come off too quick with a smaller gutter. So as far as the design goes, the design looks to be like it's gonna work fine. The construction, I can't speak to any of that.
And I would like for everybody to remember, on the first phase of this subdivision, it's extruded curb, so it's a completely different curb to start with as opposed to the second phase.
Is the new road narrower than the old road with the adjustment? Do we know that? The road that meets it?
The road is not narrower, but the gutter is. So the roadway width is still the same.
But that would have been either way with the curb detail, right?
But with
I believe as constructed, that the road is 1 foot narrower.
I think the old road it felt like it was narrow from our other discussions or something.
Correct.
So-
I believe it was approved at 30 feet and it's 29 feet, if I remember the numbers correctly. So it is in fact 1 foot narrower than what was approved on the original construction design plans.
the asphalt's still 24 foot, and the curb, 6 inches on each curb was the difference, and it makes the foot up. But the asphalt itself is still the 24 foot.
I'm saying the existing road of Sweetbriar entry, the road that meets it, is it shrinking to go to the new road, is that?
It's the same. It's the same as what we done.
I believe that's correct.
I'm just playing devil's advocate because there's different ways to skin a cat. If it still functions as designed, the runoff, the curb and gutter, it's not a main road, it's tying into a road that's already I think it still captures what our specifications are after. If it still, I don't know the word. It still functions as intended. That's just my only discussion.
You know, if I would have felt this from the board 2 months ago, I wouldn't have I went and bought other new curbs, took the other ones, or curb inlets, took all those out. I spent a ton of money. It's not about the money. I've spent the money on doing it. And if it's voted against this, I'm gonna spend more money tearing out what I put in. I mean, it's just, I completely misunderstood what the board was ready to vote on tonight 2 months ago, I believe. I don't think I was. I think I heard it right. Maybe
On
wrong.
this thing, in recalling it, I do feel like that we did tell this gentleman that if he could get in compliance and everything, that we could somewhat see our way through this. And I recently, on some sidewalks, I couldn't go along with some sidewalks because, and at some time we've got to call, we can't keep doing this. We can't get something built and then it be wrong. But on this particular instance, I think that we did, this was when Will was still here, and we did tell this gentleman that if it worked, that we would at least, in my opinion, I think that we did give him a positive type of idea in his head. I felt like that's where we was going that night, that if the engineer came back and said it worked, and they worked around the things, and we would be able to think about approving it. That does not mean that I think that I want this happening again. If this was to happen again, and you brought one back, I would probably never approve it for you again.
I understand.
I would be like some of these other gentlemen up here.
And I'm the one, I'll take full responsibility. I know.
But you did come in, we did talk about whether the 18-inch would suffice over the 24-inch. I mean, I can't remember all the details. I remember it was a lengthy conversation on this. Like I said, I would probably vote for it tonight because of the fact I think that we may have led you that way, or the conversation that night may have been that way. But as a board, we can't keep going forward. I mean, it's like on a regular basis, somebody's coming in and telling us we didn't do this or this didn't get done, and that gets to be old for us. And we're accepting this for the city of Fairview. It's not, I'm not accepting it for me. None of these. We're accepting it for the city. And when it's not done right, to me, we're accepting a product that was. I looked at a thing this weekend, and the people hadn't put a vapor barrier underneath a building that was low to the ground, and immediately I knew there was a lot more wrong with that, because you find one thing wrong, what else is wrong? And I think Commissioner down here brought that up. But I do recall, and I think that was when Will was still here, before that you was on board here, and there was a discussion that would it work, and if it would work, then we might be inclined to, if you could make the adjustments. So that's the way I recall it, and I would be hard pressed not because I want to, but because I feel like that we may, because you did go out and do the, make the adjustments as that I feel like that we may have requested, or the engineers may have requested of you.
I promise I would not made changes if I didn't have a comfortable feeling going forward that day. And that's what I actually told Mr. Collins when I left and making those changes, that I felt like the calculations was gonna work. And like I said, I think I covered myself as good as I thought I could. That night, I think I talked to every one of y'all and appreciated you considering thinking about it, and I think I thanked every one of you that night about that.
Mr. Cunningham, here's the problem. We couldn't really even consider it until we knew if it was going to work or not. Because if it came back that it doesn't work, the calculations, then there's no consideration to be had. So just because we have to ask, is it even possible to work, doesn't mean we're thinking about approving it. We just have to know, because nobody knew. That information had to be provided before we can even have a real conversation about it. Because if it doesn't work, there's no conversation, period. I mean, that's my thinking, right? Again, we go back to, like Mr. Power said, when does this stop? At what point do we say, this is what the standard is, and the standard is doing what's approved? Whether that's you, the next developer, another, whoever. We need developers, and I'm not trying to be hard on anybody, I'm just trying to say, do what you say you're going to do. Don't come in here and say, oh, poor me, I messed up. Let it go. You know what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be the expert. You're the one who builds these things, not us. We're just saying, okay, this is what you want to do. It's approved, so do it. I don't think that's too much to ask, and I don't think it's too much to ask to understand that we say, no, we're not going to approve it when you don't follow through and do what you're supposed to. I think that just needs to be somewhat the standard going forward. Whatever's approved is what needs to be done. If there's a variance that needs to be done, ask for it in advance, before you spend the time, before you spend the money. We'll hear you out. We may or may not approve it, but at least it's smart business sense to ask before you spend the money and the time.
I just want to go, I mean, if we do approve this, and then someone else comes up next time and does the same thing, and they go to the appeals board, they say, well, you let this one go through, why can't you let mine go through? When does the standards get to stand for themselves, and when does the variance stuff cease to be discussed or taken every time something's not followed through? General contractor puts up a bond, a letter of credit, and he says, I'm going to build it according to these plans and specs that I've offered to the city. And with that, the bond stands there and the promise to build in accordance to the plans and specs. This did not occur in your subdivision. And to me, it's black and white. And to come back and try to modify it I think it was a waste of time.
Mr. Gunningham, if I may, just to retrace this whole process, the developer comes before the board and says, here are some plans. We approve the plans and say, yes, this is great to do, right? And then you as a developer, correct me if I'm wrong, but you take those plans and you say, hey, this is what's been approved, and you hand it to a builder and say, go ahead and build this. Is that correct?
I'm the contractor.
So you're the developer and the
I'm
builder at the
developer,
same
yes, sir.
time?
I'm not,
Gotcha.
I'm on the job. I took the fault.
Okay.
The first meeting, I took the fault. I never put the fault on anybody else.
That's fine, because my path right there, or my logic flow is at some point, if you did hire a builder, then if they didn't follow through correctly on the plans that you gave them, the responsibility, the burden of responsibility would be on you to hold their feet to the fire because they didn't fulfill the work that you requested them to do, correct?
I understand.
Then at some point in time, the decision was made, instead of placing the responsibility on yourself to make sure the builder, in this case still yourself, fulfilled their end of the bargain, the burden of responsibility seems to want to be forced onto the board. And that's where I'm uncomfortable. Does that make sense? I understand I make mistakes all the time. Like, I'm not saying that, I'm not judging you for making mistakes, right? I'm just saying that when we make mistakes, we can't expect other people to pick up our responsibility for that mistake. Does that make sense? We have to still own that. And it is a mistake that will cost a lot of time, and will probably be a mistake that causes a lot of financial burden as well. And I understand that, and it sucks, but at the same time, that's responsibility. And that's where I'm at right now.
I don't see where it's gonna cost the city anything
Oh, not
more.
for us.
Right.
I'm talking about
In the
the
future.
financial responsibility on your end.
That I understand.
I understand that it's a burden, yeah.
That I understand, because I would have never went forward and done the work that I've done if I ever heard what I'm hearing now. I would have never done that.
Well, if personally, if you heard anything from me that seemed positive, like I was in the mood to affirm this and let this go through, that was never an intention of mine. So I apologize if you misinterpreted it that way.
I would have rather been voted down 2 months ago, and I could have spent the money that I've done so far in tearing everything out. I would have lost a lot of money, but now it's just.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, two fundamental principles that are in my mind. Number one, if we accept this, we're adding a burden to the city as we go forward with improvements to the paving of the road. It will be more cumbersome upon us as it relates to expense. And number two, the system as already installed is already inferior. It already has cracks in it. I've been over there and looked at it. And I have a serious problem with both of those issues.
And I had talked to Mr. Collins about that. I told him I had talked to Mr. Collins about that, and I said when driveways is put in the subdivision, some of those will go away. The cracks, all that will be replaced. Whatever I need to do as we do a walkthrough going forward, those have to be cut out. I've got to fix those. I'll have to fix those. That'll be on me.
Just for open discussion, I think that the S-curve for the pavement has been fixed. They've made the drains smaller. That's what the calculations were, showing the smaller drains and if they would suffice. I think no matter what the curb size is, you're probably gonna see cracks. Those usually very often are cut and repaired out just for, discussion back and forth. But I think that we would go there either way, what size it was, and say these are cracked, we need to replace this section.
Yes, sir.
Just devil's advocate. Does anyone like to make a motion? We still don't have a motion. More questions or discussion?
Does the city engineer have a recommendation? Do you have a recommendation?
I think his standpoint is from, functionality. I think the calculations work, and it's up to us to decide if.
Calculations I've been provided, the numbers work. The design works from a drainage standpoint. The water that hits the site gets delivered off-site as intended and as designed. The other issues and other things that have been discussed, I haven't been part of. So my role is to basically review what's been designed and check and make sure that those things have been done.
Is there any additional cost to repave the roads?
As long as the width, as long as the S's are have been taken out, then it shouldn't be any more.
Shouldn't be anymore.
Because the milling and overlay would be a 12-foot lane and a 12-foot lane.
Okay, so no additional cost to repave the road. So that's a moot point, right? And it drains, the drainage is good. So what happens if we don't approve it?
Procedure, there will be 3 items that would take place. Number 1, the board take no action, and no action is taken, meaning that the construction plans in place are the construction plans of record. That's what would have to be done. The second thing, so if there's no action, there's no action. The construction plans on record are the construction plans going forward. The planning commission can vote to approve the variances, or the planning commission can vote to deny the variances. I would remind you that a silence or no action is in effect a denial of those because they've not been considered. So in reality, you could procedurally vote to approve the variances, or a silence is equivalent to a denial of the variances at this point. If that,
So I'll ask for a motion one more time. If not, we'll move forward.
I would like to make a motion to deny the variances for Sweetbriar Springs.
Go first,
Second.
second. Any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed?
All right. Thanks, sir. We'll move to reports for discussion and information from the city planning staff. Mr. Sullivan?
I don't have anything tonight. Thank you all for being here. Actually, I do have one thing. Next month, we do have a 6 o'clock meeting before. I don't know if Mr. Collins was going to mention that or not, and it is on the last slide. But do want to remind everybody that we will have that 6 o'clock next month.
Sir? City Manager Collins?
yes, sir, just that. The work session, also there will likely need to be at the next planning commission meeting and executive session. There's some legal matters that have come before the city that will be related to some procedural matters for the planning commission. So we will likely schedule a executive session likely to take place before the meeting is convened on August 13th. So we'll likely have the work session at 6 p.m. A part of that will be an executive session. We would adjourn out of the executive session into the regular meeting for that night. Secondly, we are working on a revised training schedule for this fall. We've talked about trying to incorporate as much training as we can and compress that as much as we can. We're going to get a physical training schedule out so we can do a couple of work sessions for that training. We've also identified some online training and other resources that you can do individually if you choose to do that, so that you can get some certifications and time online. We've all talked about the training agenda that we have. We want to increase that agenda just a bit to make sure we're all getting as much as we can out of that. So if you get some emails from me regarding that, that's what will be. If there are online trainings or other things to be done, there'll be links to that, so you can get that, and you'll be able to have that information back to us. We'll be able to track it and make sure that that's done. So that's all I have for you tonight.
Sir? City Engineer, Mr. Blackburn?
Nothing to add, sir.
Thank you, sir. City Attorney, Mr. Potter?
Nothing, sir.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Burks?
A couple things. First, I'm gonna say I'm actually very excited Waffle House is coming. My son is ecstatic. He loves Waffle House, and I'm just leery of doing contingencies because they've come back and bid us so many times that I would like us to get out of the business of doing contingencies and just get it right when it gets up to us. So, I'm not trying to be difficult with the Waffle House people. I'm actually very pro Waffle House.
And may I add one thing? Completely agree. No question. I think had we gotten that same document at noon today, we would have been able to report to you that does meet what needs to be met. So I absolutely, completely agree and completely sympathetic. We got the thing at 4:30, And looking at the document, it absolutely appears as it's going to meet that. We didn't want to give that assertion at the meeting, but I have no doubt by this time tomorrow that thing's done. So
we
I
not
do
have a-
apologize for us getting it late, but I did not want to put you in the position to have to delay on that.
Understand.
Do we not have that timetabled outline of if you're not submitted by this date, you won't even be on the agenda? Because I would rather call them and say, you're not going to make the agenda tonight because you didn't hit the deadlines, than them show up, make a ruckus of saying, well, we didn't even know about this, we're just finding out about this. Because we have those hard dates,
We do, and oddly in this, because we had a little time in between, we actually added a second review. So in all honesty, we kind of did more, we had time for more review during this time from the last meeting, and we were working to do those things. When they submitted it, again, the staff was prepared to recommend deferring, but when we knew the document was going to be innately simple, I just hated to do that. So yes, sir, any other time I would say absolutely yes. But given what we had before us, I just felt that it was a simple presentation, so.
Additionally, I'm really not trying to be difficult with builders and developers that come here. I just ask if they make a deal with us, that they follow through with it. At some point, we have to say, you have to do what you say you're going to do. In my profession, if I make an agreement, it's usually in writing, or it's stamped by a judge or something similar. If it's wrong, I don't really get to go change it. Most often, I'm just stuck with it. And we have to start holding the people that come before us accountable, because it's an agreement. We're saying, yes, you can do this, but you have to do it this way. And they're the ones providing how they're going to do it. So we just need to stick to our guns and going forward, say, okay, you know what to expect. Do it right. So, and I'm sorry that may be difficult, but at some point, that message needs to be made. But go Waffle House. So, anyway, that's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Schulis? Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Anderson?
I've got a comment, relates to our development as we go forward with the city. Last night, the Dixon Water and Sewer, and again, this past month, they had a blockage in an existing line in Dixon, not here, where it backflowed off of a grinder pump into the home, and they had like 2 feet of the home. They've recently just taken out a $10,000 deductible, multi-million-dollar policy to protect themselves against such things. But what is causing this, and it's causing it nationwide, is these wipe and disposable tissues that are being tossed down sewer systems. And it's not just there. It's a grinder pump issue. It's a failure of a backflow preventer that cannot work with these tissues or other solids that would come backwards. And so we're here in Fairview and in Williamson County, and the majority of the houses being built now are having grinder pumps sitting right outside the houses. And these houses are being exposed because of those kind of issues. People are supposed to be able to buy a backflow rider on their homeowner's policy, and I bet none of us have it. So it was brought up last month. It's just a real issue, and it's nothing that we're doing wrong or the Dixon's doing wrong. It's a PR thing that the product that's being sold doesn't do what it says it'll do.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for serving on that board, that role. Mr. Power?
Yeah, my only thing, I hate contingencies worse than anybody. And probably if a contractor comes in here and asks for a contingency, he will get a no vote from me. But when it's on our staff on contingent on whether they do their job or not, or whether they approve something or not, I have to trust our staff. We've got a new engineer, and he says that he'll approve it, and if he doesn't approve it, they couldn't move forward. If Waffle House had came in here and said, we'll do this, and if you'll give us a contingency, I would have not voted for it. But we have to trust our own staff. And the other thing on the road, I just really felt like that we probably did lead that man down to think that what he was doing was the right thing in the discussion we had before. Since then, we've changed engineers. There's been a lot of things happen, but the conversation we had, I thought, I mean, maybe he shouldn't have went ahead. Maybe he should have came back and said, this will work. Can I get a variance on it now, as opposed to going ahead and doing it? Maybe he did that wrong, but something in my heart made me think that we did ask that man, could he fix the problem? So that's all I've got to say.
Sir. Mr. Kelly?
Nothing tonight.
Walls?
I've just got just a short message that I'd like to say. When I say that I don't, I don't want to make things easy by any means on everybody when they're coming in here. When, I'm into risk management all the time. I'm always weighing the risk on everything in my job and so forth. And when I feel like that there's a small risk, a very small risk, and especially when the risk is just in your hands, then I think that it's wise as a planning commission to approve it and let's move on, because, things are sticky enough as they are out there. I just think, there's a lot of business coming in here, and I think that if there's just 1% risk or 2%, 5%, you just have to weigh it. We all have to look at the whole situation as far as what the contingency is, and how it could come back on us, of course. And our decisions are very important because they impact the whole town of Fairview. But I'm just a big believer in not intentionally being difficult. And I hear sometimes from other people who do business in Thompson Station and Spring Hill and other places, and they say to me, you just can't, coming into Fairview, it's just like pulling teeth. Fairview's so tough. They have such, and I don't know, I have no idea, but I don't want to be like I mean, are we so difficult to deal with, or is it just them, or are they just, anyway? So I don't want, are our standards here or what?
If it makes you feel better, they say the same thing.
Do they say the same
Absolutely.
thing?
Everywhere they go is, everywhere you go, everywhere
I'm
else is
hearing all
more.
this whining.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm going, really?
All
They're
right.
saying, Fairview, you guys are so tough. So, I want everything to be done right. And I totally believe in that. And in everything, but especially in business, everything has to be done right. And especially in planning and zoning. So, but I just don't want to be more difficult than we have to be. That's my philosophy. So, yeah, that's all.
Mary Blade?
Two things. Contingencies can be disastrous. They can be worked out, but they can be disastrous. The second thing, our jobs are not easy, and sometimes saying no is not an easy thing to say. In my profession, as Mr. Burks, if I make a mistake, I own it. It's mine. I have contracts. I'm stuck with it. I have to make it right. Tonight, no was the right answer. Thank you.
Sir, Mr. Jenkins?
I agree with that. With that being said, though, there is a time and a place for extending grace and extending mercy. I didn't feel like tonight was one of those nights due to the violation of trust from that developer on past issues. For the entire time that I've served on this board, there was one specific case where it was like this room was full of people all complaining about drainage issues from a development that Marlon Cunningham developed. So there's already been a violation of trust there. And that issue still, as far as I understand, hasn't fully been resolved. We just kind of let it go to this point where like we really can't do anything about it. And I didn't want to run that risk again. If someone builds up trust and they've always come before us, they've been respectful, they've had their plans together, they do what they say they're going to do, and then randomly after years of a relationship, they do something that just isn't right. Man, maybe right then is the time to extend grace or to extend mercy in that situation. But I didn't feel like tonight, with previous violations of trust from that one developer, that tonight was the night to say yes. So that's why I had absolutely, like, I had to say no on that one.
Thank you, sir. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved.
You didn't have any comments?
We always want to hear something from the boss.